All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Star Wars Marco Balance. My name is Mark, and I am sorry I missed last week, but we're going to get back into my Clone Wars arc rankings. I've already done 26 through 13 in my previous two episodes. Today we're doing 12 through 7. I'm so excited because we're getting to the nitty gritty. We're getting to the top of the line Clone Wars arcs. And this is where it gets tough because all of these arcs are neck and neck. I love these arcs so much for so many different reasons, whether it's introducing new iconic characters to the Star Wars galaxy. We have incredible world building that's still influencing Star Wars shows today. And then we just have some over the top action packed arcs that are so fantastic. And I'm really excited to get into all of these. If you haven't listened to my previous two episodes, I'm only ranking arcs that are 3 or more episodes long. There are some great 2-episode arcs in the Clone Wars, but I am not including them in this ranking list, which is why I ended up with 26 Clone Wars arcs when really there could probably be 30 or so, and that's why I have this really awkward list and why I'm going to be doing 12 through 7 today of my rankings, but that's how we got here. And without further ado, I'm just going to jump right in. With number 12, I have the Obi-Wan undercover arc. This is the arc where Obi-Wan transforms into Rako Hardeen. He changes his face, he shaves his hair, and he fakes his own death in order to get in on a plot with bounty hunters who are planning to assassinate Chancellor Palpatine. One, it features Cad Bane prominently throughout all of the episodes, and we get to learn more about his character and his honor code. Two, we get to see the very unique scenario where Anakin feels he has lost Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan has died, and we see his emotions flare up. We see that dark side of Anakin come out in a couple of these episodes, whether it's to get revenge on Rako Hardeen, who he thinks killed Obi-Wan, or when he finds out that Obi-Wan lied to him this entire time and didn't have him involved in the entire plot. For obvious reasons, they couldn't have Anakin involved, but it still hits and hurts the same for Anakin, and I think it's so unique because we see Anakin fall to the dark side because of love, whether it's losing his mother or losing Padme, but it's a very interesting idea to see him potentially fall to the dark side or slip into the dark side because he loses Obi-Wan, someone who's maybe not looked at on the same level as Padme or his mother, but he loves just the same in a familial way. And it makes so many moments in this arc feel so tense and emotionally charged. In some cases where Anakin is fighting Obi-Wan as Rako Hardeen and he doesn't even realize it, Obi-Wan could potentially die because of Anakin, and Anakin wouldn't even know it until later on. Or in the moments where Anakin does find out that Obi-Wan lied to him. All of it is just really great character work, and I love that Ahsoka is kind of in the background, seeing Anakin in this very frail state, and also hurting because she lost Obi-Wan as well. She's not in on the plot either, and I think that just adds another emotional layer to this very intriguing arc. As I said at the start, I love that Cad Bane is prominently featured in this arc. I think we learn so much more about his honor code and maybe bounty hunters in general and their honor codes that they live by. And Obi-Wan really has to work to gain Cad Bane's trust. And the relationship the two characters build throughout these episodes is really great because, of course, Cad Bane is so smart and so intelligent that at any moment you feel like Obi-Wan could slip up and Cad Bane would be able to sniff it out. And a couple times it feels like he's gonna, but then Obi-Wan as Rako Hardeen will impress Cad Bane in one way or another, and Cad Bane won't exactly say, like, that was great, you're awesome, but you know that there's that mutual respect there, and I think it's so great for Cad Bane's character. And also just seeing Obi-Wan as a fish out of water in the bounty hunter game, especially the episode called The Box, where all the bounty hunters are put through these trials inside this box that puts them in very precarious situations and they have to work together to get their way out. Cad Bane has this great moment at the end where Moralo Eval, I think that's his name, he created the box and he has this whole plan for the bounty hunters to assassinate Chancellor Palpatine. And he basically gets frustrated that Rako Hardeen is getting all the credit. He's showing him up and destroying all of the obstacles in his way. And he gets in the ring and he's using the box unfairly to beat Rako Hardeen. And he's about to kill him and Cad Bane stops him and he's like, if you're going to kill him, do it like a man. I don't know why I just did like an alien Jamaican accent there, but you know what I was trying to do with the Cad Bane voice there. Cad Bane steps up and shows that respect that he has for Reiko Hardin and says, no, I have a code. You can't just kill him like this. He's a valuable asset. You got to kill him man to man, straight up, no cheating. And it's just such a great Cad Bane moment. And so this arc just does a lot of things well. We get a lot of emotionally tense moments. We get an indicator of a potential rift between Anakin and Obi-Wan that starts here and has kind of festered in the background, and that might add to the rift between them in Revenge of the Sith. We get more Cad Bane and more about his character and his honor code, and we get a cool plot to potentially kill Chancellor Palpatine, which he was the orchestrator of everything, so we really don't know how far that went. And we see the Jedi Council dip into a very unorthodox plan where they would put one of their masters in a very precarious situation where that master might have to do some morally ambiguous things to complete the mission. And I think that adds to the mindset of the Jedi Council during the Clone Wars and what the Clone Wars has really done to their way of thinking. So this is a great arc. Coming up next at number 11, I think a lot of people will be shocked that this arc doesn't crack my top 10, but I have a very good reason as to why I leave it out, even though I do think this is a fantastic arc that does a lot of great world building around the mysteries of the Force. And the arc I'm talking about is the Yoda Force Ghost arc at the end of Season 6 of the Clone Wars, where Yoda essentially goes on a pilgrimage to learn how to become a Force Ghost after he dies. And I think I speak for everyone when I say this is something we've always wanted to learn about as Star Wars fans. How does one become a Force Ghost after death? What are the trials? What is the training that they have to go through? So this arc fills that gap very well, and there's a lot of really cool, really heady moments in this arc where Yoda is coming face to face with these cosmic figures that have different emotions on their masks, and Yoda travels to Korriban, the Sith homeworld, and he encounters Darth Bane, or a vestige of Darth Bane. It really isn't him because the Sith don't have the power to become Force Ghosts, but it was more of a dark side cave where it plays tricks on your mind and Yoda sees through it. So there's a lot of really cool Force-centric stuff going on in this arc, and Yoda does have a really fantastic character arc here where he learns to face his own fears. Literally, he has to face a dark side version of himself because Yoda, frankly, always pushed that side away from him, and he maybe didn't acknowledge it as much as he should, because becoming one or balanced with the Force means that you acknowledge your dark side. You don't let it control you, but you acknowledge that the emotions are there. Everyone feels jealousy, anger, pride, but you can't let those emotions drive your decisions. And Yoda had pretty much everything under control, his pride, jealousy, ego, all of those things, but when it came to fear, he always pushed fear aside, but he didn't acknowledge it. And I think this arc, even though it is pretty on the nose, does a great job of showing him confronting that and learning from it. And really, you see that becoming a Force Ghost, at least how I interpret it, is simply acknowledging all parts of yourself and being at peace with that. I'm sure there's more detail and more training that goes into it than that, but I think in its purest form, and I think George Lucas always opted for the more simple explanations for things, and that's why the Force is so understandable and so universally loved as a magic system to all cultures around the world, and why Star Wars has still remained prevalent today. It's that the Force is just a representation of real life, light side and dark side. We all have light side and dark side within us, but it's our choice and our decisions that define us. And when you let the dark side win one time, it's more likely to happen again and again, and then you slip into that dark place. But we also acknowledge that the light side is probably the harder side to lean on, because being patient, granting forgiveness, keeping your ego in check, all of these things are hard, and the dark side is the easy path. Being jealous, getting angry, being hateful, it's all very easy, quick emotions. And sure, they grant you temporary power, but in the long run, they just eat away at you. And that's what's beautiful about the Force. It's this simplicity in the messaging. So all of that is great. And if you love Star Wars for the very mysterious, ambiguous, otherworldly aspects of the Star Wars galaxy, this arc is fantastic. I think the thing that really holds this arc back for me personally is that Yoda being the main character and the only real character that you follow for these 4 episodes is a bit much, because Yoda isn't a main character. Yoda is a supporting character first and foremost. So when you give a supporting character a main character role for an extended amount of time, there's a risk that they simply can't carry the story, or they aren't meant to be carrying that much of the story with them. And I think that's the case for me with this arc. I love Yoda. He's one of my favorite characters. He's fantastic. He's iconic. But I think at multiple moments in this arc, it really could have used another character for Yoda to bounce off of. And I know they try it with R2-D2 coming on the journey. I know he has these interactions with Darth Bane and those cosmic figures and literally fights himself. But I don't think Yoda is a strong enough character to lead an entire arc by himself with no other supporting characters, because at the end of the day, Yoda was always meant to be a supporting character. I understand that people love this arc and probably have this as a top 5 arc, but this is really the thing that holds it back for me. And I'd be curious to see if anyone else agrees with me in that respect, because I always see in Clone Wars arc lists that this arc is always really highly ranked. And it's highly ranked in mine. I mean, 11 is nothing to be ashamed of, but I acknowledge that this is probably low for most people. But for me, if I saw Qui-Gon doing this or Obi-Wan doing this, I feel like this arc would have been a bit more interesting. But I understand that from a larger Star Wars perspective, Yoda had to be the one to go on this journey. So really a preference thing here. Still love this arc, but I'm going to have it at number 11. Next up, we finally enter the top 10, and at number 10, I have the Asajj Ventress redemption arc. Now, admittedly, this arc is a little disjointed. It begins in Season 3 when she is betrayed by Count Dooku and left to die on a separatist ship, and she returns to the Night Sisters, and she creates Savage Opress to get her revenge against Count Dooku. It fails, and she goes out on her own, and then it picks up in Season 4 when Dooku orders the massacre of the Night Sisters because he found out that it was them who assisted in his attempted assassination. And then it's capped off with her joining a bounty hunting mission with young Boba Fett and Bossk to deliver cargo on this underground train and defend it against bandits who want to steal it. And you could even argue that her appearance in the Maul Returns arc, where she fights alongside Obi-Wan against Maul and Savage, is a part of her redemption arc. It's really hard to pin down, but I feel like it's important to group all of these things together, because her redemption arc is something that was not on my bingo card at the beginning of the Clone Wars, because she was very unlikable. She was very one-note as a character, and every time she was on screen, she always seemed to enjoy killing and being an assassin for Count Dooku. So it was hard to ever empathize with her. And I never thought that she would become one of my favorite Star Wars characters. But the Clone Wars, the book The Dark Disciple, which unfortunately was never animated, but if it was animated in the Clone Wars, I think a lot more people would also feel the same way about her, because it's such a compelling arc that she goes on. She goes from, like I said, this very one-note character to someone who has this really terrible, tragic backstory of being a Padawan and losing her master and having to fend for herself from a very young age. It's very reminiscent of Ahsoka and her upbringing. If Ahsoka lost her master and she was left out in the field, would she end up the same way as Ventress? That's not excusing what Ventress has done. She has done terrible things, but understanding how she got to that point in her life, all the things that were working against her, and then ultimately her repentance for what she's done and the new codes she lives by the end of this arc, when we see her let the princess go, and she essentially does the right thing in the end, when it would have been very easy to let this princess suffer. She would have gotten her money, the bounty would have been complete, but because she knows what it's like to be trapped or pawned off or discarded, you can't help but understand her more as a character. And all of her sarcasm and dark humor that used to make you hate her when she was the enemy and when she was fully invested in the dark side is a lot more endearing by the end of her redemption arc, because now we sympathize with her, we understand where she's coming from, and we're rooting for her to continue to get better and keep moving forward on this better path in her life. And that's really a very Star Wars-esque message. You can fall to the dark side, but you could always be redeemed, as Vader showed. And what I love about this arc is that it reframes Asajj Ventress so effectively right from the beginning. I still remember vividly when she crashes her ship and she's defeated by Anakin and Obi-Wan, I think, and she's in the ship and it's about to explode and it's about to go down, and she asks Count Dooku for help. As you just felt that she was this child that had come out from the mask that she always had on of confidence, and she's like, "Master, I need help, please help." And he's like, "You failed me for the last time." And you realize once that's taken away from her, she has nothing. She goes all the way back to her roots on Dathomir to rediscover herself, because the Separatists are gone. Count Dooku is gone. The Sith mean nothing to her anymore. And this is all within the first 10 minutes of that first episode. And I love how quickly you switch to her side after hating her for the better part of 3 seasons. And yeah, she's still rough around the edges, and that's, part of the redemption arc. You can't just flip a switch like some characters do in current Disney Star Wars. It's a growing process. She is very violent to the men of Dathomir, who they eventually use to create Savage Opress. She kills innocent men, and she pretty much uses Savage as she was once used. But the best thing that happens to her in this entire arc is that she does fail. She doesn't get her revenge on Count Dooku, and she has to learn to move on from this hatred she has for him. Of course, she always harbors it, but if she were to get that revenge against Count Dooku, she wouldn't be on that path anymore. She would fall deeper into the dark side. So while we're rooting for her and we want to see Count Dooku die because he is really the engine that's pushing the Clone Wars forward, aside from Chancellor Palpatine, we also have to be happy that Asajj didn't fall back into the dark side of things. Of course, the hits don't stop coming, because then Grievous shows up to her homeworld of Dathomir and kills all of her sisters. And so again, she loses everything and she's out on her own. Again, adding another layer of sympathy for the character, but instead of rolling over and giving up, she commits herself to this bounty hunter lifestyle and giving this outlaw frontier justice to the galaxy in her own way through the bounty episode. She also pops up in the Ahsoka Leaves the Order arc at the end of the 5th season. I wouldn't really consider this a part of that arc, but in the end, she does try to help Ahsoka through her predicament, and she does deliver one of the best lines in Star Wars Clone Wars that I'm going to talk about when I do talk about that arc. Don't want to spoil that here. And her journey goes on. Like I said, they have the Dark Disciple book, which was supposed to be an animated arc here with Quinlan Vos, but Clone Wars got canceled and it never got animated. But the book is fantastic, and frankly, the book ends and it's pretty beautiful and a perfect end to her arc, but then she shows up in Bad Batch and we don't really know what's going to go on moving forward. I think she's going to have her own animated series. I think they're going to continue the Bad Batch storyline that they set up, and she's going to be working for the Hidden Path, protecting Force users across the galaxy, and that would be really great. But I also loved the way Dark Disciple ends, so I'm very curious how they explain that away or what they're going to do with her character moving forward. But the fact that I do care about her character moving forward and that she has become such a beloved character in Star Wars just proves the effectiveness of this redemption arc that she has and why I have it in my top 10 Clone Wars arcs. Moving on to number 9, this is the most controversial Clone Wars arc, bar none, and I'm of course talking about the Mortis arc. Interpretations of this arc are still being debated today. I have one theory for what it all meant, and someone else might have a completely different one. I'm personally under the opinion that the arc didn't really happen, and it was more of a metaphor or shared force cave type experience between Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Ahsoka, but that may be not true because we see the Mortis arcs in the Ahsoka live-action series, and it seems they're going to be doing even more with these characters moving forward. We see them in Rebels on the Jedi Temple, so these figures, are they real? Do they exist? Do they really hold the balance of the galaxy in their hands, and moral decisions really don't affect them aside from Anakin because he is the chosen one? Now, personally, because of my interpretation of this arc, the Mortis gods don't bother me, but I totally understand that some Star Wars fans do not like the existence of these cosmic figures because it minimalizes the decisions of characters we love or the mortal characters of the galaxy, because essentially there are these godlike beings that hold the pendulum of the galaxy in balance, and this father figure is the balance between the son and the daughter, the light side and the dark side. For me, it's really a metaphor, but I understand that it very much seems that they might be following this path that, no, they do very much exist, and they are a key piece to the power balance of the galaxy. So that's, there's more to be seen there, but I know that that's a really big factor as to where people rank the Mortis arc. Some people love it, some people hate it, some think it's just too ambiguous or too confusing and doesn't really pick a side on anything. For me, I'm a sucker for symbolism, imagery, surreal storytelling that conveys themes or characters' internal dialogues or internal decision making. I'm always a big fan of that type of storytelling, so this really works for me because it puts Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, and Anakin all under the microscope, and we see that foreshadowing of the future. We see Anakin embrace the dark side and become that episode 3 version of himself to essentially prevent himself from becoming that, if that makes sense. We see Ahsoka speak to an older version of herself who warns her that because her master is towing the line of the light side and the dark side, that she has darkness within her too, or at least in her mind she is acknowledging that I am learning from someone that has tendencies towards the dark side. And that's something we see come up in the Ahsoka live action series, where she enters the world between worlds and she is very much mentally working through the idea that she could have easily fallen to the dark side because she had a master like Anakin, and she blames herself because she finds out that Anakin does become Darth Vader. Obi-Wan, on the other hand, is really interesting because he sits in the middle during this entire arc, but he does have those key moments where he proves that he's more than just a bystander and that he does affect the decisions of Anakin or the people around him, but in the end, he does feel like a pawn in this game that they're playing. And I think that's a really interesting distillation of his character in the broader story of Star Wars. He's not the main character. He is the epitome of a supporting character. We see it in the original trilogy. He gets more of that main character in the prequels, but again, it's not his story. And I think the Mortis arc really drives that home in a very interesting way because it's told in such a surrealist way. The Mortis gods themselves are very interesting. I mean, the sister is probably the most underdeveloped of all of them. She's pretty much a shining angel that is always concerned about others and is selfless, whereas the brother is an unstable entity where he's conniving, manipulative, but he's also very caring for his sister and wears his emotions on his sleeve. So I like that they show the dark side not as this overall evil, but more of a complex concoction of all negative emotions, even ones that are maybe associated with good things like love and care for family or loved ones. And Sam Witwer does a fantastic job of voicing the brother. The Red Lightning is really cool. And then the father is definitely the most interesting of the bunch because he is that figurehead of the Mortis gods. He is the balance. He is the one that's growing old and needs Anakin to replace him to restore the balance. Now, do I think gods will get old? Do I think that really was the point of this, to say this ethereal god is getting older and Anakin physically needs to replace him? No, I think it's more of a metaphor that Anakin needs to maintain the balance or bring balance to the Force because it's in a very shaky, unstable place that could go away at any time. Like this old god could die at any time. But again, we see the father statue at the end of the Ahsoka series, so the father may come up again. and maybe more than just a metaphor, but it remains to be seen. Again, this is just my interpretation, and I think there's a lot of interpretations that can be taken from this arc, and that's why it's so strong, because it is something you can continue to dissect and work through in your mind. And I can definitely acknowledge that that is not for some Star Wars fans, and I totally get it, and I won't lie and say that I've always loved this arc. I think it was something that was very perplexing when I first saw it week to week on Cartoon Network, but over time rewatching it, I've come to appreciate it more and more, and I think it's just one of those Clone Wars arcs that stands out and needs to be at the top of a Clone Wars arc list, whether you like it or not, just because of its impact and the risk it was to tell a story like this. I'm always going to give original stories the benefit of the doubt, and I'm always going to rank those higher than stories that are maybe more safe. There's also so many cool theories about like the daughter giving her life force to Ahsoka because Ahsoka gets overtaken by the brother's influence, and now wherever Ahsoka goes, there's always that moray owl that represents the daughter following her. So it's like, is the daughter living within Ahsoka? It's all really cool, and I like I said, I love the imagery, I love the symbolism, and that's why I have it really high on my list. At number 8, I have the Mandalore plot arc from Season 2. This arc is the definition of influential, not just within Clone Wars, but in the broader scope of Star Wars storytelling and canon today. We learn about the rich history of Mandalore and the warrior culture of the Mandalorians. We get introduced to the terrorist organization Death Watch and their leader, Pre Vizsla, voiced by Jon Favreau. We meet Duchess Satine Kryze, one of the best characters in all of Star Wars, who is the leader of Mandalore and is trying to usher in a time of peace and reject their warrior culture of the past. She also happens to be the love interest of Obi-Wan Kenobi before he became a master. And Mandalore gave us a very personal look at what neutral worlds went through during the Clone Wars. Whether you joined the Republic or the Separatists, it didn't matter. The promises of protection were empty. This arc and all the subsequent episodes related to Mandalore throughout the Clone Wars are so rich in themes, character work, and world building that I simply can't leave this opening arc out of my top 10. It's so undeniably influential to not only Clone Wars, but to Star Wars lore and storytelling as a whole. And I understand that this arc isn't completely original. I'm not an expert on the EU or Legends, but I know that Mandalore, the Death Watch have all been explored in other mediums that are no longer canon, and I'm sure Dave Filoni and the entire Clone Wars team drew a lot from these sources, but that doesn't take away from the execution here, because I think they knew they had something special from this first arc, because Mandalore continues to pop up throughout the Clone Wars, and it's the climax of the entire series with the Siege of Mandalore in the end. We have so much investment in this world because the foundation was so well crafted. Placing us on a world with a people that are going through a cultural change from their historically warrior-centric culture to a new peaceful regime during the biggest conflict the galaxy has ever seen creates a prime breeding ground for storytelling and conflict between characters and groups on the planet. It gives you the chance to explore so many poignant themes around change and what true strength is, which I think the character of Satine embodies so well, and makes her one of my favorite characters in Star Wars. Getting into the plot itself, the arc does a fantastic job of dropping us into this very tense situation on the planet of Mandalore where the stakes are established right away. A scene that always stands out to me and is a great example as to why this arc works so well and is so good at what it does is when Obi-Wan and Satine are walking through the city of Sundari and a bomb goes off and another terrorist attack has happened. And they chase the assailant who ends up killing himself. He commits suicide by jumping off the edge of a building. And before he does, he speaks in an old world tongue that Obi-Wan doesn't recognize. And it's revealed that it's a old Mandalorian language. I think it might have been for the moon of Concordia, I believe. Not only is this a great piece of world building, but very effective imagery. You understand immediately the conviction of the other side, of the Death Watch, of the terrorists, of the people still holding on to the old ways of the warrior culture. They're willing to kill and then kill themselves to see their vision of the future come to life. And the other great piece of this is that Satine has empathy for this terrorist when they do die. it shows how vehemently against violence and how wasteful she thinks it is in the end. You also see a bit of understanding from her. She knows that this is a very difficult transition for her people, but it doesn't dissuade her from continuing her march for peace for her world and changing the way that her people think and act. Satine is such a great barometer to compare our favorite Clone Wars characters against morally, because throughout this arc, especially with Obi-Wan, we see him be on the side of war and violence more than not. And we know he means well, but he's become so desensitized to war and violence that he defends it without question. And when Satine calls it out, as an audience member, you're left to question it as well. Have the Jedi lost their ways? When you compare them to someone so devoted to nonviolence and peace like Satine, it makes them look even worse. And there really isn't a correct answer to this. I think this arc just makes a great counterpoint to the traditional thought process of the Jedi and their role in the Clone Wars. We know that in Andor with Luthen, he very much knows that he is a morally terrible person, but he is doing it for the right reason. In his great monologue, we see that he is very aware that what he is doing is not glorious. But if it's in the name of fighting tyranny, is it correct? That's really up for the audience to decide, but I really love that so many different pieces of Star Wars media present different answers to that question. Aside from the deep philosophical stuff, I think they do a great job of establishing Pre Vizsla as a villain that will be omnipresent throughout the Clone Wars, voiced by Jon Favreau. The Darksaber, we learn more about that lore in Rebels, but it's so cool in its introduction here. The Death Watch are such a formidable foe because they're trained, they're not droids, and they have the Beskar armor, which is tougher than what the Jedi you're used to fighting against. The Death Watch literally beat up Obi-Wan, and it's like, damn, these guys aren't to be messed with. And if they gain the support of the people, which is not that hard to do because, as I said, the people's mindset is still kind of baked in that warrior way. They just needed someone to bring it back out of them. And so that makes the Death Watch as an organization not only formidable from a physical standpoint or a power standpoint, but also from a ideological standpoint, that they can get all these supporters and rise up against the government of the planet. I feel like I've spent a lot of time on this arc, so I'm just going to give some wrapping up thoughts. The Voyage of Temptation episode is awesome, with Anakin killing the guy that threatens to blow up the ship at the end, and him being like, what? He was going to blow up the ship. The spider droid aspect of horror that they bring into that episode is great as well. And then the more political-centric episode of the Duchess of Mandalore episode, where they're on Coruscant, and there's a plea that the Republic needs to occupy Mandalore to keep them safe, but if you occupy Mandalore, then you're pulled into the war and you're no longer neutral. So Satine has to convince the Senate that that's not true, that a prominent senator on her planet isn't proposing that. So it's a little bit of that political intrigue. So this arc kind of hits all of the points. It has the politics, it has the action, it has the horror, it has so many great things. I mean, so many great things. This is a fantastic arc. I grouped this first part of the arc and not some of the other stuff, like when Corky or like Ahsoka is on Mandalore teaching the kids about war and stuff like that. I don't think that really connects here, but obviously this arc is multifaceted, kind of like the Maul arc that I split up. So I wanted to group this just by itself here as a 3-episode chunk. Obviously, I'll be talking about some later arcs from Mandalore because it's arguably the best part of the Clone Wars, no doubt. And again, just to reiterate, this first arc set it all off. So I have to give it its flowers and put it in my top 10 and put it at number 8. All right, we've reached the final ranking for today's episode. At number 7, I'm going with the Geonosis arc from Season 2. Season 2 was a banger, and this arc holds a special place in my heart because it not only scratches that nostalgia itch because it was those early seasons of the Clone Wars, but it's also really great storytelling, and the execution of the over-the-top planet-wide action is so great. The clone trooper designs, which was something that I always looked forward to when I was a kid. I always wanted to see new clone trooper colorways and designs, and the Geonosis clone troopers in this are so cool, something we hadn't seen before. We get great character moments between Ahsoka and Barriss. This is really the arc that establishes them as foils for each other throughout the Clone Wars series, because we know how it ends between them, but they very much could have ended up in each other's shoes by the end of the Clone Wars. And finally, we end the arc with 2 episodes focusing on zombies in the Star Wars galaxy, which is something I wasn't expecting, but I absolutely love the concept of the Geonosian hive mind. The episode where they go into the tunnels and find the queen is still something that sticks out to me so much when I think about this series. And then we get the fantastic conclusion to this arc where Barriss and Ahsoka need to survive on a ship surrounded by clones who have been overtaken by the hive mind and the brain invader worms. It's a great callback to Alien and Dead Space and all of these sci-fi horror IPs that have come out, and I love that Star Wars dipped into this, and I want to see more of this because just the concept of being trapped in the middle of space on a ship is so fantastic from a horror storytelling perspective that I think Star Wars needs to embrace it more. I mean, there's the book Death Troopers, which is a real zombie outbreak on a ship with stormtroopers that turn into zombies, and then even Star Wars Republic Commandos, one of the missions, you go onto a derelict ship and you find out there's these Trandoshan hunters that are killing clone troopers on it, and you feel the claustrophobia of the ship and that you're being hunted as well. And I just want to see more of those stories, and I love that Clone Wars did it here. Let me back up to the first episode from this arc, Landing at Point Rain, because this is the episode I would look for on the back of the complete Season 2 DVD set to find out what disc the Geonosis arc started on. I think it was disc 2. I love how much action this episode packs into 22 minutes. We have the 3-prong attack where Obi-Wan's whole division gets shot down and they're set up in a defensive position for the entire episode. Ki-Adi-Mundi is way off course. They are wounded and he barely makes it out alive. And then Ahsoka and Anakin end up having to take down this fortification wall to regroup with the rest of the attack force. And the pacing of this episode, as I remember it, was so well done, balancing all 3 of these storylines while also fitting in some character moments. My favorite part of this episode is when they all are keeping track of how many droids they've destroyed, and by the end, Ahsoka and Anakin are fighting over, oh, well, I took out this, that counts as that many droids, and then Ki-Adi-Mundi is like, 55, and all of them just look at him like, damn, and he's like, what do I win? And they're like, you're my undying respect, Master Mundi, and Master Mundi's just like, oh, okay, that's fine. And then this episode ends with this really creative tracking shot where we're following the Jedi and clones as they go directly towards this comms relay or the shield generator, and things are popping up around them, and we see their numbers dwindling, but we see they make it, and then they finally destroy the relay. It's such a cool shot, and it's one of those shots that stick out to me from the beginning episodes of the Clone Wars in the first 2 seasons, where I'm like, they're improving, they're getting better, they're integrating more cinematic shots, and it obviously pays off by the end of Clone Wars that they learned from episodes like this because they tried new things. Then the next episode is Droid Factory, where Ahsoka and Barriss seemingly give their lives to destroy the droid factory that's creating the new super tanks that have the impenetrable armor. And this episode, I always remember my sister was so excited that she thought Ahsoka had finally died. She was like, oh my gosh, the Padawan, she finally died. This is going to be so emotional. And I don't know why she always wanted Ahsoka to die so early on, because obviously she would never die that early on because she's the main character. But it always sticks out in my head that Jen was so excited for this episode. She's like, oh, yes, does she finally die? Perfect. Not because she hated Ahsoka, but because she thought it would be so emotional. And it was, regardless if she actually died or not. They did a great job of cutting out the sound effects and making it this muffled scene where they shoot the main reactor and then everything goes silent and it's just the music playing, and we see Anakin and all the clones have a reaction shot to the factory coming down, and they're like, wait, isn't Ahsoka still in there? So good, so dramatic, so cinematic. And with Ahsoka and Barriss seemingly gone, Anakin and Luminara have these dueling principles on looking for their Padawans, and Anakin represents the overly attached way, and Luminara represents the current Jedi way of thinking, which is so detached that they almost come off cold and unfeeling when they should be compassionate. Anakin shows that his love and his care for Ahsoka ends up paying off, and they're able to save Ahsoka and Barriss. But we also see that Anakin takes that idea too far in Revenge of the Sith, and being overly caring and possessive over your attachments leads to the dark side. On the other hand, we have Luminara, who's like, well, if they became one with the Force, then that's okay. We should celebrate their life. And it's almost like she's giving up on her Padawan. She's really not, but because the Jedi are so dogmatic at this point in the Clone Wars, they come off as unfeeling and not compassionate, and it's why they lose so much of that reverence from the common people of the galaxy. And I think this episode just does a great job of showing the duality between their two principles, and that neither one of them is entirely wrong, but they're also not correct. And as I already mentioned, the last two episodes focus on the hive mind brain invaders and the Geonosian zombies, and I think this was such a cool change of pace from the over-the-top bombastic battle that had taken place over the first two episodes, that we now have a more intimate two episodes that are intimately horrific. So even when things change in this arc, it's still so consistent at telling really interesting and compelling stories with character and great action. So I love the Geonosis arc. I think it's one of the best, and I'm curious if people have this arc as high as I do, especially above arcs like Mortis and Yoda's Force Ghost arc. But that does it for today's episode. Sorry for the week delay on this one. I'm planning a lot of stuff for the podcast, and I'm very busy, so I'm just kind of juggling all these things, but I promise I'm working for you guys in the background. I love recording these Clone Wars episodes, so I hope you're enjoying. If you do, please leave a rating on whatever streaming platform you're listening to this on. And if you want to get more updates on the podcast, follow me on Instagram at @star_wars_markofbalance. DM me. Let's talk some Star Wars. Let's talk some Clone Wars. I appreciate you guys listening. As always, stay safe, stay healthy, and may the Force be with you. Peace.